extend my best wishes to all members as we embark on this crucial national endeavor.
Optimizing the holding of government assets, in particular to implement a strategy of increasing the value that the government gets from its investments.
Welcome to OTNA, your window to information on optimization.
Reforms take time. It's a process, and the process of reforms always brings results. But where does it start from, and how is this process done? Welcome. It's another edition of OTNA, Optimizing the Nation's Assets. Today on the program, I'll be speaking with an optimizer, a man who understands the process of reforms, having served as Director General of the Bureau of Public Enterprises in 1999. He was also the immediate past governor of Kaduna State. Malam Nasiru el-Rufai is our guest today on OTNA. Come with me and let's have a feel of what reforms is all about as we take you back in time to how the process has been, which has led to some of the great reforms that we can see, we can touch, we can handle today in Nigeria.
OTNA, optimizing the nation's assets.
Thank you very much for joining us, Your Excellency. Some people know you from newspapers, some others know you as former governor of Kaduna State. We know that your story is much more beyond that. Provide us, Your Excellency, with some overview of your professional background and what really led you to become the Director General of the Bureau of Public Enterprises, BPE.
I graduated from Ahmadu Bello University in 1980 as a quantity surveyor. I served in Ogun State and began my working career in Zaria, Kaduna State. After a couple of years, I went and got an MBA, and I became interested in the subject. Took time off to attend Arthur D. Little School of Management to do a graduate diploma in privatization, along with some staff of the BPE at the time, I remember. And it was just out of interest. I didn't know that I was going to end up as the Director General of BPE. Fast forward a few years later, Abdulsalam Abubakar became the head of state, and he invited me to join a team of advisors, senior policy advisors. There were 6 of us. And I was privileged to be one of the 6 that worked with another individual, now deceased, Ama Iwagu, who became a senator but sadly died of lung cancer. The 2 of us more or less worked on the economic policy making of the Abdulsalam transition government, and we drafted the privatization and commercialization decree, which led to the establishment of National Council on Privatization and the new BPE. President Obasanjo offered me the job as DG of BPE to now implement what I played a role in drafting under a military government. I now had the opportunity to implement it under a democratic dispensation. So that's how I ended up being announced as the DG of BPE.
From your records, Your Excellency, at your time as Director General, you particularly focused on reforms. It was clear that you had some particular passion for reforms, and this led to the privatization and commercialization of some enterprises in Nigeria at that time. Tell us, what motivated you? Why did you focus on the reforms at that time? What was your motivation?
We began the process of establishing a competition commission, which I'm happy years after I left BPE, we have the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission to prevent collusion and monopolies and so on and so forth. So we thought of, even in the competitive sectors, avoiding oligopolies and monopolies, or even monopsonies. Now, for the utility sectors, for the commanding heights of the economy that were exclusively in the hands of the government. Here I'm referring to electricity, for instance, telecoms at the time, the seaports, the rail system, the oil and gas sector, the upstream oil and gas, and even the downstream. Most of it was government controlled because Unipetrol, which became Owando, National Oil, Nolchem, which became corn oil, and AP, which became many things and is now, I don't know what it is now, 40 oil or whatever. They were all still in the hands of the government, okay? But we felt that before you sell those private, public monopolies, let's put them that way, we needed to ensure that the macroeconomy is reformed. We look at the legal constraints to private sector participation, we remove them. Where we feel that there is a need for a sector regulator, we establish the sector regulator, we train the first set of regulators and ensure that they regulate, they are quite capable of regulating the sector so that there is a level playing field. And then we license new competitors. So we're not just privatizing, we're also undertaking policy, legal and regulatory reform, along with the ministers. So in each of the major sectors, we created steering committees to steer reform. And those committees are usually chaired by the sector ministers. So for instance, we established the communication sector reform committee chaired by the Minister of Communications. But the DG BPE was the coordinator. I was the chief executive. The minister was the chair. And we have members from the private and public sectors, academia, with expertise in that area to help us demonopolize the sector, to help us write a new policy, draft new law to repeal the monopolistic laws, establish a sector regulator, and then empower that regulator to be able to license private operators. We did that successfully in telecommunications. Already the NCC was in existence, but it was a weak NCC. It could only regulate private telephone companies. They couldn't regulate NITEL. We changed the law. We drafted it in BP, the Communications, what became the Communications Act 2003, was drafted in BPE under our leadership. And we got that through to the National Assembly. It was passed. It strengthened NCC. It enabled the NCC to issue GSM licenses, for instance. It enabled the NCC to do all the kind of good work it did. And today, our telecom sector is something that we are proud of. So that's one thing we got right. We tried the same track for electricity. We tried the same track for oil and gas. We tried the same track for aviation, Nigeria Airways, the airports, and so on, because we felt that reform was necessary to demonopolize sectors, to create a level playing field, and create an environment for competition.
Generally, change is very difficult to adapt to, and this touches on the mindset of the people. I'm wondering, what did you do about the mindset of the people who probably didn't want this change to happen? How did you get it happen against the backdrop of the mindset of some people who thought otherwise?
We forced it on them. Look, I was lucky as head of BPE to have a very powerful vice president. NCP in my time met unfailingly every month. Once a month, NCP met, because we submit progress reports. We tell the council what we intend to do for the next 1 month so that we could be held accountable. And We tell them where we need political support. But generally speaking, we got the cooperation of the ministers. They understood. They were also getting educated about privatization. They were seeing the benefits. And whenever we go to a complicated issue like pensions, because pension was not privatization, but it is BPE that started the pension reforms that you now have. All the beneficiaries of contributory pension should thank BPE because we started it. We started it because we saw a problem when we were privatizing enterprises with unfunded pension liabilities. And we came up with a memo to address that. And that memo was so well received by the Vice President and the Minister of Finance at the time, late Mala Adamu Chiroma, that immediately after the council meeting, they said, let's go and brief President Obasanjo because we have this problem with the public service as well. At that time, Nigeria had unfunded pension liabilities of nearly 900 billion in the public sector, the federal civil service. Pensioners were dying, military pensioners were not getting their pensions, and so on. So they said, this is a problem that affects not only state-owned enterprises, but the entire country. So let's go and see Obasanjo. And we went to the brief President Obasanjo. I represented the memo to him, and he said, no, this is what you are proposing. The solution you are proposing for public enterprises should be adopted for the whole country. Right? And the committee we had on pension reforms for public enterprises was headed by Fola Adiola. And it was their report that I presented to the council with their suggestions on how to resolve the pension problems. And the solution was to start a contributory pension scheme. Government should fund the gap, and over time, we'll have enough pot of money, not only to ensure that every pensioner is paid, but even to provide long-term source of funding for the economy, which we didn't have at the time.
As you just saw, Your Excellency and our dear viewers, it's clear that reforms brings success. As you can see what it was before and what it is now. We're speaking, and that's why we're speaking with you, Your Excellency, Malam Nasiru el-Rufai, former governor of Kaduna State and former Director General of the Bureau of Public Enterprises. Now, Your Excellency, let's talk about public offers and investor relations. Some people question the way the system is done, the public offers system. Sometimes people will tell you that it's not transparent, that some things seem not to be straight. How did you handle public offers, or how did you handle investor relations, ensuring that things were done straight and there was the necessary transparency for everyone to see clearly?
Okay, look, the BP already had a tradition from its TCPC days of handling public offers for shares, okay, listing on the stock exchange. That's the least controversial. They know how to do that very well. The challenge that I faced when I took over was in the privatization decree that we inherited, or I would say we drafted, Ama Iwagu and I. We introduced this idea of co-investors, okay? Because we found that many of the companies we privatized, the shares were so spread wide that nobody was in charge. So these companies ended up being victims of the dictatorship of management without any corporate governance controls.
Memories can be very wonderful, especially when you have to think back of what happened previously. So share with us, Your Excellency, your most memorable experience of investor relations, the situation around it, and how it was done.
My most memorable experience had to do with the sale of Nitel. Okay. We went round the world trying to get investors to buy Nitel. Nobody was interested. In the end, we got 3 bids, I think, 3 or 4 bids. Our valuation for Nitel, now remember, Nitel was the national telecoms monopoly. It had only 400,000 lines, telephone lines. We had sunk in $7 billion over the years in Nitel for 400,000 telephone lines and 10,000 mobile lines. That was Nitel. That was what we were out to sell. But we didn't go out in the BPE to sell Nitel. We were interested in selling the market. We were selling the market opportunity. Nitel was worth almost nothing. But the market opportunity, 100 million people at the time that wanted telephones that they couldn't get. You have to join a queue of years to get a phone line or bribe. That's what we are selling. So we made efforts. So Harino Elewi of blessed memory was the Minister of State Communications, and we prepared our PowerPoint presentations. We went to London and made a presentation to Vodafone. Come, GSM license $1. This is the market. This is the market. They listened to us, took notes, and said they will get back to us. They sent us 2-paragraph letter. We are sorry, we are unable to invest in, we are unable to accept your offer of a GSM license because though the Nigerian market is huge, 100 million people, but the per capita income is such that they cannot, not more than 5 million people can afford a GSM phone in the first 3 years. That was what their numbers told them. I called, I said, guys, these numbers are fake. So what do you mean? I said, Nigeria's informal economy is 80 to 90% of the economy. What the numbers measure, what the GDP numbers of Nigeria measure, it's the formal economy. It doesn't measure the informal economy. The market is 10 times what you think. I said no. They declined. That's my most memorable experience. Anyway, we went on to privatize Nitel. The guys paid 10%. They couldn't pay the balance. It was aborted. I left. It was tried again, and so on and so forth. But that's not the story. The story is that the outcome of the reforms of the telecom sector are clear for everyone to see. So when you reform correctly, when you reform properly, the results are clear. And the telecom sector is an example of what we can do in electricity, what we can do in oil and gas, what we can do everywhere. And BPE has proved it with the reform of the pension industry, which is not even part of privatization. But we oversaw that. We steered it through. We provided the first set of commissioners, and PENCOM still works.
If you could turn back the hands of time, what changes would you make with what you now know and what you can now see? Because you're looking back at when you were there and you're looking now at what's going on. What would you have changed if you could turn back the hands of time?
If there is anything that I would have wanted differently to our BPE, was to maintain a succession system by picking people from within. Because if I had been succeeded by one of the directors in BPE, maybe it would have taken a completely different path.
Why do you think so?
Because our directors were very well prepared, and they knew what to do. And it was, look, BP is not a political job. It's a technocratic job. The political aspects of the job in the purview of the Vice President and Privatization Council. BPE is a technocratic organization. It's supposed to do things by the rules and just, without any feelings, without any consideration, implement reforms for the benefit of Nigerians.
Before we go, Your Excellency, some Nigerians still do not understand reforms. In fact, what you hear from most people when they hear about privatization and commercialization, they have a feeling that you're just selling government assets, selling our collective assets to people and empowering just a few people. So how would you explain reforms to such people who do not understand it? What are the advantages of reforms? How will reforms turn our economy around?
What I want Nigerians to advert their minds to is one or two things. First, for those old enough to remember when we had only Nitel providing telecom services, I want them to compare with life then and now, when you have a choice of moving from Glo to MTN to Airtel to 9 Mobile. It's freedom. Okay? I know that 70% of Nigerians were born after 1993. So they don't know some of the things that we have lived. But there was a time when to withdraw money from your bank, you have to go to the bank, fill forms, get a token, and wait for hours to collect your money. There were no ATMs. There are no bank cards. There was no POS. How did we get there? We got there because somebody called Ibrahim Babangida decided to start licensing private banks and decided that all government-owned banks should be privatized. That's how the banking system took off. Today, the 3-4 largest banks in Nigeria did not exist 30 years ago. They were just licensed, they are just names. Zenith was just starting. Guarantee Trust had just opened the doors. Okay? Access did not exist. But they are the largest banks in Nigeria today. Imagine Nigeria without Access Bank, Guarantee Trust, and Zenith. That's the benefit of reform. That's what Nigeria would have been. You would still have been going to a bank, waiting and collecting tokens. You will have to wait even longer because the population of Nigeria has doubled since then. This is what we need to understand. The world is changing. And you have to adapt. And one of these adaptations is continuous reform. You must always look at where you are and say, how can I be better? How can I get better? And you cannot do so unless you move from where you are to another position. That's reform. And it is not always comfortable. It is not always easy. And it doesn't always work. All right? But it is better than remaining in one place. It's better than being static.
We want to thank you very much for the privilege of speaking with you, and thank you for coming on the program OTNA. It can only get better, and we can only continue to hope that things get better from the time you were there to the people who are there now, and what the future holds as the federal government does its bit to ensure that we move to greater heights. Let me thank you very much for joining us on the program. Malam Nasir el-Rufai, former Governor of Kaduna State and former Director General of the Bureau of Public Enterprises, BPE. Thank you very much, sir.
OTNA, optimization on the go.
No doubt, it's very clear that reforms is the way to go to have a bigger, better, richer Nigeria. And you and I have our roles to play. Until we come your way again next week on OTNA, remember, reforms lead to optimization of the assets in Nigeria. Remember that optimizing the nation's assets is the way to go. And with this, our country, Nigeria, Africa, as a continent, and indeed globally, we would have a better world for you and for me. Bye for now.
This is OTNA, optimizing the nation's assets.
Over 11 committees were set up to drive specific sector. We can't be selling a transaction halfway, you say you withdraw the power of attorney. So we made them irrevocable. If you allow BPE to operate, they will deliver a perfect transaction.